moment you enter a stage where you have some sense of what the users want, what is your delivery going to look like, what is the rough level journey that people want on your product, at that is the phase when you start figuring out what is the optimal journey. So A/B testing in a big way is about optimization. When you have some sense of what is the baseline journeys that you want to take the users to, what is the baseline offering that you have, that's when you start changing your offering.
Hi everyone, welcome today to the PM School's Minimum Viable podcast. We have Vaibhav Srivastava. He's the Director of User Retention and Analytics at RummyCircle. Hey Vaibhav, what's up man?
Hi Nikunj, thank you for inviting me to this podcast. Looking forward to the conversation here.
Over to you, Ankit.
So Vaibhav, let's jump right to the question, right? So Kunal Shah famously tweeted that nobody changed the world by doing A/B testing, right? And I would like to draw from that tweet, that he means that when you're building 0 to 1, A/B testing might not be of much help, and only post that experimentation will help. So according to you, at what stage should a startup or a business consider A/B testing?
I think I totally agree with what Kunal Shah said, that it's not possible to change the world by A/B testing. To some extent, that is. So there are two stages of any company, and not just any company, any feature that you build also. There are two phases, 2 or 3 phases actually to that feature, right? At the first phase, you don't know what the market will react to it. You don't know whether there's an actual demand for that, whether users actually want that product or not. So there's no journey that you already have in mind that's the right user journey. At that very moment, A/B testing can't help. Think of it like this way, that right now Google and Microsoft do a lot of A/B testing on Play Store, on the Bing pages, on the color of actual buttons on the Play Store. They do a lot of A/B testing. But you don't see that A/B testing on OpenAI products. ChatGPT right now is not being A/B tested. You don't see a lot of variants of ChatGPT. They roll features out every month. They have their dev day. They roll everything out to everybody, but they're not doing a lot of A/B testing at every moment, right? ChatGPT right now is still, even though it's almost been a year since they launched, but it's still very much in the 0 to 1 phase. It's still figuring out what's the right thing, what are the right tool sets to add, what are the right features to add. At this moment, A/B testing definitely is not for it. You first want to figure out what is the right market, what is that product market fit, typical question that we ask about, right? A/B testing will typically not help a lot with finding that product market fit. But the moment you have a good sense of what a PMF could look like in the future, it does not need to be totally sorted at that very moment. But the moment you enter a stage where you have some sense of what the users want, what is your delivery going to look like, what is the rough level journey that people want on your product, at that is the phase when you start figuring out what is the optimal journey. So A/B testing in a big way is about optimization. When you have some sense of what is the baseline journeys that you want to take the users to, what is the baseline offering that you have, that's when you start changing your offering. I'll just give another example, that when Swiggy's and Zomatos of the world, like those businesses came to India, they were running outside, but when they came to India, I think back in 2013 around with Food Panda first, at that point the products look very, very different to what they look now. The pages look very different, the discountings look very, very different, the offers, card offers, everything is very different. So at that point there was a base product. A/B testing did not help back then. But from the Food Panda product that you saw in 2013 to the Swiggy and Zomatos that you see in 2023, all that change has happened through gradual A/B testing. The journeys, the checkouts, the payment offers, everything is very, very A/B tested. So it's hard to give an exact answer, but the moment your PMF is broadly figured out, that is when you start optimizing and learning from the A/B tests that you run on a daily basis.
All right. Thanks for that elaborate answer, Vaibhav. Well, just to sort of go one level deeper, can you give us an example of an experiment that you must have run earlier or like recently? And like from setting up a certain experiment, think of like, let's say you are explaining to me what A/B testing is and like different parts and how the experiment construct is, and then measuring success. And essentially, by the end of it, when the experiment is concluded, like just go through the journey of like one experiment end to end so that a viewer can fundamentally understand how it's help a business. That's it.
Sure, Nikunj. I'll need, that's a long question, so I'll need your help whenever you feel that there's something particular you want me to deep dive into.
For sure.
But I'll first of all give an example of, so I was consulting a company called Rainmaker. That was in a crypto gaming space. So they started a game which was about crypto fantasy. So you make a portfolio of cryptos and then you start playing with that team, so to speak, but it's actually a portfolio. So here again, it's a classic thing that you talked about, that when to start A/B testing. So this is a very new game in the market. It's not been tested before. People don't know whether, first of all, anybody wants to play a crypto fantasy game or not, right? So they started with something, and they started with a app. They told that it's a crypto fantasy game. On the app, on the Play Store, and wherever the product was listed on the landing pages, it was a site-related app at that point. So they ran on the first page, it was just crypto fantasy written over there. Then when people installed the app, then they could actually join the games after making a team, right? They had very poor view to install rate. So basically, when people landed on the landing page on which the app was hosted, and when people actually ended up installing the app, and after that entering their phone number, signing up, so there was a huge drop off. If 100 users landed up on the install page that was hosting the app, hardly 3 or 4% were actually signing up, giving their phone numbers, entering the OTP, and like actually start to play the game.
Got it.
So this massive drop off, but the company also saw that once people have signed up, the repeat rates are quite good. So to some extent, they figured out that people who are interested, they actually want to play a long game. So that was kind of the feedback they got from the market about the PMF. There is a market that exists for this particular game, right? But the funnels are very low. The funnel rates are dropping at every point in time. So now you come to a point that let's A/B test this and figure out the optimal journeys, how to improve the number of people actually who start to play the game.
So you A/B test on that landing page where the app is hosted. You essentially want to optimize the like, let's say, landing page visit to install rate, and you are essentially looking at different ways and different sort of alternative journeys, which would be the right journey to sort of go with, right?
To some extent, but I'll just add a bit more to it. So we were also trying to optimize the visit to install rate, but also the install to sign up rate. So there are two parts to it, because for you to start playing a game, you also want to sign up and then actually land up post your sign in. Right?
Understood.
Only then will you start playing the game. So we realized, so there are two things that we wanted to tackle: visit to install and then install to sign up. And there was a major drop off at both the stages. Now, the metric that we need to measure in this case was pretty straightforward, because it's a very like top of the funnel drop off. So you want to improve the funnel rates, you want to improve the visit to install rate, you want to improve the install to sign up rate. Now, first of all, the moment we start to work on the visit to install rate, which is the top of the funnel part, right? We thought that, okay, why are people not actually not going beyond this point? Why is there a drop off in the first place? And that is when the A/B test design part comes in. Before you design the experiment, you need to have some hypothesis around why something is not going right. Otherwise, you can't design a A/B test properly. We realized that the ads were talking about win big amounts, but when they landed on the page, on the landing page, there was no mention of winning big amounts. There was directly about play India's first crypto fantasy game or something like that. So there was this dissonance. So we realized that we need to tackle that problem first up, so that when people come from an ad, they do see some linkage between what was happening on the ad and what's happening on the landing page. So we ran a few tests around the messaging changes on the landing app, that what this app is about. We brought some mention of the winning amounts. But we also wanted to bring some crypto element in on those landing pages, so that people know when they land on the app itself, they don't lose that context. So that was one part. We ran a lot of A/B tests on that, and we eventually figured out that we will have to use a mixture of winning amounts, but also that it's a crypto space thing. So a background which had some subtleties of the Bitcoin symbols, the Ethereum symbols, and also a very bold mention of the opportunity to win big. So there were some tests on that, and it actually ended up this version that I'm talking about, the mention of win big and a subtle background of crypto symbols, that ended up giving us a meaningful lift in the visit to install rate. Now, again, we were now wondering about how to increase the install to sign up rate, because there was a pretty meaningful drop at that point too. Now came the second chain of A/B testing. The second chain of A/B testing was all about improving the signups. And like again, when you start to think about how to improve this, how to find the right journey to improve this funnel metric, you again go back and start to think about that. Why is this funnel metric low in the first place? So that you can get answers to how to design the experiment. Because in a real world, unfortunately, you can't test 1,000 paths. And especially for smaller companies, they don't even have enough traffic to break down into multiple segments, right? So we realize that again, the current page is we are offering just a blank text box in which people can enter their phone numbers. We thought that till now, the thing that has improved our visit to install it has been about mentioning more context, right? So why not just hold people's hand and then give them that context again at that very moment? So on that page, we started talking about two things. One thing is again what they had been coming here for, because ultimately these users have been coming from the landing page, from the ads, for the opportunity to win big. So if you don't talk about that on the sign up screen, again there'll be some drop off. You need to create that enthusiasm again. So you mentioned that on the sign up page, but apart from that, you also want to mention another thing, which is a welcome bonus. So you added a welcome bonus and you add also the opportunity to win big on that platform. So we ran two variants of this. In one of the variants, so again, why we ran two variants in the first place, right? Because we don't know that which one of these two contexts is more important. Do people care more about a welcome bonus, or do people care more about the opportunity to win big? Because the context have already been set. We ran two variants. We eventually ended up realizing that the variant that had more prominent mention of the welcome bonus, but a less prominent version of the opportunity to win big, performed the best. Our hypothesis was that it is because by the time people clicked on an ad, they went on the landing page, they were already clear about the main call out that there is an opportunity to win big. But at that very moment, when they are on the sign up screen itself, they want that further push, which was given by the opportunity to start for very low amounts and get a bonus. So that finally we were able to improve a rate that was roughly lying at 3 to 4%. It entered meaningfully into the early 20s, 20 percentage points, from a 3 to 4% rate to a 21, 22% range. It was a pretty meaningful bump. We tried some other further experiments too, but the improvements beyond this point were very incremental. These two changes were the biggest ones that brought us to that point. And now how meaningful is that? Think about it, that your cost per acquisition immediately falls down by, let's say, 1/7. If earlier you were spending 100 rupees, now you only have to spend 15 rupees per acquisition, because your cost per visit remains the same.
Interesting. You spoke about the importance of forming the right hypotheses, right? So I was going through Ronnie Kohavi's talk with Lenny Rachitsky, and he says that most experiments fail, right? So drawing from your experience at Games 24/7, how true is that first? And maybe you can throw light on a very basic thing, like how to even form the right hypothesis you're going to test, right?
So that's actually true everywhere that I have worked. Right now, I
Correct.
work with many companies, gaming and non-gaming, and that has been true all across. That most of the A/B tests will always fail.
Mm-hmm.
Have always failed. Let's say that. Now that's why the A/B test design becomes incredibly important, because you have to enter every A/B test knowing that there's a very big chance that this will not give you the results that you need, right?
Correct.
But you also don't want to reinvent the wheel from the ground up every point in time. So basically what you want is to start with one experiment. You incrementally start optimizing on that experiment. So something that started with X can end up with Y, but it's not a one-step jump from X to Y. It is incremental changes that bring you from one path to the other path, right? So I'll give another example of this at RummyCircle. Now, we started an experiment in which we were changing the orientation of the page, the payments part. You start off with something, your current payment pages are all landscape mode. You want to eventually move them to portrait mode, because that's where all the other apps are and that's what users are used to doing, right? But there's a lot of things going on the payments page. There are tile amounts, recommended tile amounts on the payment page, how much people want to deposit. There's a mention of like the certifications that RummyCircle has. There's mention of other things also on that page, so it's a fairly heavy page. It has offers, mention of various type of offers, right? It's typically any payments page that you would see in most of the online apps. Now, the moment you start to make this change, because so many things will be changing from one page to the other, that when you change it all, and if the A/B test does not perform, let's say you simply you just go that I want to test landscape versus portrait, you simply create a portrait version of your current landscape page and you test it out. The problem is, if this test fails, and if only you have converted a landscape to portrait orientation, you will never know why this test is failing. You will probably end up hypothesizing that this test failed because the portrait mode is something that people don't want, the users don't want, right? It could be very well off the truth. So when when we ran such an experiment, of course it did not work for us, like I'm saying, because most things don't, right? But because the experiment was designed in the right way, we were able to figure out that why this thing is not working out. We realized from such an experiment, we realized that when people are holding phones like this, when it's in a landscape mode, they're holding phones like this, they will eventually, the tile amounts in such a orientation was very accessible to the thumb.
Correct. Yeah.
That's why, so the distribution between the left tile, the middle tile, and the right tile click had certain proportion. Right? When we change the orientation to the portrait mode, because when you hold the phone in a portrait mode, and since most people are right-handed, they eventually holding the phone like this. They only hold like this, and only this part of the phone, which is accessible to my thumb, will be accessible. Now, this A/B test meaningfully shifted the proportion of tile usage in the portrait mode. So first of all, the first step layer was that we saw that the transactions have actually gone down because of the portrait mode. But when we start deep diving into the data, like then you start building some hypotheses that why is the transaction size going down? Is it going down because people are not going through the transaction? Is it going down because people are choosing to play with lower amounts? Right?
Correct.
So a lot of things could happen. In our case, checking into individual components of that entire page data told us that's happening because the lower tile amounts have become more accessible to the users because it's closer to the right thumb. And that's when you realize that you need to change the UI of the page to make it to make all the amounts equally accessible to the player's hands and where hand location is. So this is one example of an experiment where, unless you make a lot of deep hypothesis about user behavior, you will be able to easily analyze whether the test is working or not. That is very easy to see, right? You simply check on your success metrics whether that has happened or not. But beyond success metrics, you need to go deeper into the usage metrics. For some other companies, it could be different usage metrics, but ultimately you'll have to break down into individual user behavior and then see whether individual elements are holding. And that's how you start to improvise. Now, the second test that we ran was about changing the orientation, changing the UI of that page, and so on. And that's how you gradually move from one point to the next. Did that answer your question?
Definitely, that was super interesting. In fact, drawing from like a similar observation, people who work in OTTs have had. So a lot of users relate. In fact, users relate, holding a phone on landscape mode with high effort. So they will watch a movie, or the average watch time will be much more versus when they're watching a phone on a portrait mode, right? So if you see people watch reels on portrait mode, but they would watch a movie or a YouTube video mostly on a landscape mode because they associate landscape mode with more effort, more commitment, and portrait mode with low commitment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense why this would happen.
And if you see, that's why Hotstar or JioCinema, they're coming up with a portrait mode streaming product as well, because obviously their revenue is mostly via ads, and people don't mind watching a cricket match on a portrait mode.
Speaking into a part of the answer where you had said, right, the way you design the experiment is super important. So when you're moving from, let's say, landscape to portrait, right, there are multiple hypotheses, like what do you test and what do you not test, right? And I've seen this, like obviously back in the day at RummyCircle also, we used to have certain experiments with like 7-8 paths. And like I've also seen the world, obviously, certain companies where A/B testing has recently been introduced, and they'll be very conservative in setting up the paths, right? when you set up an experiment, obviously you'll have multiple hypotheses. Ki, hey, maybe this is what can bring the change. Maybe, and different people, stakeholders come up with their own narrative, right? How do you sort of like define, hey, these are the right paths? Like, and you're trying to like think of conflict management. I have seen this, especially in like stakeholder meetings. Everybody anecdotally says, "Acha, this is an hypothesis. No one is able to come to a conclusion. Arey, AB kar dete. Let's do AB." Right, and which is very like they think of AB tests as a way to like resolve the conflict. And for sure you should do that when you have like two hypotheses and it's the need of the hour. But can you sort of like share a framework or help us understand, like if you have multiple hypotheses, how do you decide which one to test and which one to not test? And that journey between, let's say, incrementally moving from like a first version of the experiment to this next version of the experiment. You know where you want to go, but you don't want to test everything in one go because you want to sort of run experiments in a right manner, right?
So I'll start with the last part first because it's the easiest to answer.
Yeah.
First part, there's no easy way out, like you mentioned. But also, I'll start with the second part first. That how do you move from one path to the next path? How many paths you create? How much do you want to be incremental and like while still caring about speed of execution and speed of learning, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge with having multiple changes in one go, let's say you are working on the Swiggy consumer side app, right? You create a new version of the landing page, home screen landing page. There's too many things on the Swiggy app right now. There's Dine Out, there is Instamart, there are too many things, right? And then there's a mention of offers, match day mania, there's a talk of restaurants. There's just too much on that page, right? Let's say you want to create a more slicker UI. You think that I need to change the tile sizes. I need to make, let's say you start with something, I need to make the app more attractive, right? You'll probably start playing around with the tile sizes, the colors. Let's say you change the tile sizes, the colors, the offers, the mention of offers, everything in the one go. If this experiment ends up reducing your app launch to order conversion metrics, after, you don't know, you'll again have to, the only answer you can give tomorrow is let's go back to the original control path, right? You go back to drawing board, you go back to zero. You have probably ended up wasting what, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month. And the
Right.
only answer you can say is that, Ankit, you're saying something?
No, I'm saying I agree. Yeah.
So the only answer, let's say you want to change the UI of the page, the only answer that you can have after a month of testing is that this doesn't work. You go back and then you start from the ground up again, right? Whereas if you were to know that most A/B tests fail, like Ankit just said a while back, if you went into that test with, I would say, humility, knowing that there's a good chance that you'll end up failing, you'll probably test it in a way that if the test fails, you still have some learnings going forward. So example, like if I have to change the UI of the home screen, I would first of all start with, okay, in one path, let's make the tile amounts smaller and try to give people more information about offers. In the second path, I would say, let's make the colors more sparkling so that people feel interested to actually hit those. So I would test these things out incrementally. Let's say now, if all my paths fail, I know that, okay, I lost at the first step itself, which is that people don't want a lot more information which smaller tiles would convey, right? But if in the path which had smaller, so let's say you have three paths now, control path, one path with small tiles, one path with small tiles and a very bright UI, very bright colors. If control was the best performing path, that's all right. But between the smaller tiles path and small tiles with bright UI, if the bright UI is winning, you know that when you next run an iteration, you'll probably not go with smaller tiles, but you'll probably go with the brighter colors, right? So
Got it.
that's the advantage of breaking things down into 2-3 parts. So wherever you think that there's something, again, I'll give a very, I would say, a broad level answer because it's not possible to give a very sharp answer without knowing the context. So I'll give a very broader level answer, kind of like a framework thing. Wherever, I would say, always think about what if this experiment fails? Would you be able to know that why this experiment has failed, and would you be able to change that? Will you get that learning from running an experiment? So if your UI change fails, would you be able to tell after 2 weeks time that this is failing because of XYZ reason? I need to tweak that. If your experiment can give that answer, I would say by all means, don't break it down into more parts. Don't be ultra conservative, don't be ultra aggressive, just go with that. You will be able to learn from that. But if at the outset you feel that अगर ये काम नहीं करता है, तो भी there is no way on earth I'll know कि क्यों काम नहीं करा, 5 चीजें change हो गई हैं उसमें, right? In that case, I would strongly recommend you don't do that, because very likely your experiment will actually fail and you will be back to the drawing board thinking about कि scratch से start करते हैं, फिर से कोई नया experiment करते हैं. So that will be my larger level point about running multiple paths. How do you decide how many paths to run? And in the same thing, I'll just say one more thing, that's why thinking about the end state of an experiment becomes incredibly important. आपके metrics क्या है? And not just the success metrics, but also आपके behavioral analysis के metrics क्या है? Success metrics is pretty easy, but behavioral analysis is what will tell you whether you can break down the success or failure into multiple types or not. So that would be my way of going about this.
Got it. Yeah. So Vaibhav, we've come to the last question. And so when you are hiring a product management candidate and you want to test his or her exposure to A/B testing, if you could only ask one question, what would that be?
I would typically ask users that an app of their choice that they are comfortably using for a long time, that they can talk about, what are the features that they think need to be introduced. And let's say an example, like somebody was telling me that they interviewed a candidate and they asked them that what feature would you rather have in Zomato? And they said they would rather want the ability to order from multiple restaurants. This is a very common requirement that comes with a lot of people, right?
Correct.
So the immediate next question becomes that if in the current, how would you test this out? If you want to test this feature out, how would you test this feature out? Now, if you're gonna, and let's say you are given the product bandwidth, the tech bandwidth to actually roll it out, what would be the metrics that you would use to analyze this? What would be the variant you would create so that you know whether this feature is not working because of the proposition or not working because of the journeys? It could be two different things, right? Nobody cares about ordering multiple restaurants at the same time, or it could be the journeys are too complicated to understand. So I would just always ask about, first of all, what are the products that you care about? How would you introduce a feature there? What would you A/B test? What elements would you A/B test there? And what would be the success metrics of that test? Larger level, I think all the candidates that want to go to product will inevitably need to learn A/B testing, either on the job or before the job, right? So it becomes very important to be able to break down into small linear factors that what elements are changing from one part to the other, and how do you analyze those elements from path A to path B to path C.
Correct.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. Well, loved the takeaways, especially the end state in the previous question and even the last one. This is like a very standard question in product management. You will get like a broad statement, hey, pick your favorite app, and like you essentially ask the person to pick a problem, right? How they break the problem down, and it's very difficult for people to come up with something that's impacting a large group of users and frame the problem really well. So totally resonate with what you're saying. Thank you, Vaibhav. Today, I think we might need like one more to a deep dive session on A/B testing, but for paucity of time, thank you for the session today. That's it from my end.
Thanks, Nikunj. Thanks, Ankit. It was a pleasure speaking to PM School.